They called themselves apex predators. They declared humanity weak, fragile, and destined for slavery. But they never saw the trap coming, a centuries-long deception designed to lure them into extinction. What happens when an empire built on conquest meets a species that plans not for victory, but for absolute erasure? The Vexar war fleet materialized across 37 star systems without warning, their arrival signatures appearing simultaneously on every long-range sensor. 50,000 warships dropped from quantum slipstream, their angular black hulls blocking out stars as they took formation around human colonies. 5 million combat-ready troops stood ready in dropships, their weapon systems active and targeting solutions already calculated. This was not an invasion fleet. It was an extermination force moving with rehearsed precision. On the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Thra activated the galaxy-wide broadcast frequency. His scaled face filled millions of screens across human space, vertical slit pupils regarding the camera with detached superiority. He delivered the terms without preamble. Humanity had 1 standard hour to surrender unconditionally. Every warship must power down weapons and engines. Every colony must open its orbital defenses. Every military installation must submit its access codes. The alternative was total extinction. Thra's voice remained flat and mechanical as he explained the futility of resistance. No species had ever penetrated Vexar quantum phase shields. No enemy had survived concentrated assault from their particle lances. Their conquest of 17 previous civilizations had never taken more than 6 hours from initial contact to complete subjugation. Humanity's primitive fusion drives and projectile weapons represented no meaningful threat to their technological superiority. The countdown began the moment his transmission ended. This display of overwhelming force followed standard Vexar doctrine. They always arrived with at least 3 times the necessary military strength. They always issued impossible ultimatums. They always demonstrated their capabilities through visible shows of force. A century of unchallenged expansion had perfected this psychological warfare technique. Subject species either surrendered immediately or provided minimal resistance before breaking. The Vexar had never encountered a civilization that fought back effectively, much less one that had prepared for their arrival. On Earth and across the colonies, emergency alerts flashed across every screen. Civil defense sirens activated in major population centers. Traffic control systems began emergency landing protocols for civilian craft. News networks showed panicked crowds gathering in public squares. Military channels flooded with distress calls and requests for orders. To every observer, humanity appeared completely overwhelmed by the scale of the threat. The Vexar surveillance ships monitoring these reactions confirmed all their predictions about human weakness. What the Vexar sensors did not detect were the secondary command networks activating beneath mountain ranges and ocean floors. They did not notice the precise lack of military mobilization, where key defensive installations should have been responding. They overlooked the calculated patterns in the apparent chaos of evacuation procedures. Every reaction had been carefully calibrated to present the exact image of helplessness the Vexar expected to see. The Vexar confidence stemmed from their perfect record of conquest, but also from a critical intelligence failure. They assessed civilizations based on visible technology, economic output, and military deployments. They understood power as something that must be displayed to be effective. The concept of hiding capability for centuries was alien to their predatory psychology. They could not imagine a species investing generations into preparing for a confrontation that might never come. Their ultimatum timer continued counting down, 59 minutes remaining, until the promised assault would begin. On the Eternal Dominion's bridge, Thra watched the human systems with satisfaction. His tactical display showed no concerning movements, no unexpected energy signatures, no coordinated defensive preparations. The prey species was behaving exactly as predicted. What the Vexar Empire never considered was why humanity's response seemed so perfectly aligned with their expectations. They were so certain of their assessment that they didn't question the convenience of encountering a species that matched their psychological profile so completely. Their confidence became the exact weapon that would be used against them. While the Vexar expanded their empire through visible conquest, humanity pursued a different path entirely. 3 centuries before first contact, Project Ghostwalker received its initial funding authorization. The program operated under complete secrecy. buried beneath 17 layers of classified research initiatives and civilian scientific projects. Its true purpose remained known to fewer than 50 people at any given time, with each generation passing responsibility to the next, through carefully vetted successors. This was not a conventional weapons development program. Ghostwalker represented a comprehensive survival strategy designed around one principle: complete species preservation through absolute preparedness. Human scientists analyzed every recorded first contact scenario in galactic archives, studying patterns of successful resistance and catastrophic failure across 17 documented civilizations. They identified consistent psychological profiles among predatory species, noting how conquest-oriented cultures consistently underestimated defensive preparations that didn't match their own expansionist models. Research teams spent decades reverse engineering alien technology, from salvaged wreckage and archaeological finds, not to replicate it but to understand its limitations. Psychologists developed detailed profiles of predator species behavior, mapping decision-making patterns under stress, and identifying critical vulnerabilities in command structures. Sociologists studied how conquered civilizations maintained resistance movements, while physicists explored theoretical weapons systems that could bypass conventional defenses. The project maintained its secrecy through deliberate technological restraint. Humanity's publicly visible spacefaring technology advanced at a carefully managed pace, always appearing one generation behind theoretical capabilities. Military deployments emphasized defensive postures rather than expeditionary forces. Economic development focused on internal infrastructure rather than colonial expansion. Every aspect of human civilization projected the image of a species concerned with internal stability rather than external threats. Generations of engineers worked on isolated components without understanding the final system. One team might develop power systems for dimensional phase weapons while another worked on stealth materials for deep space deployment. A third group refined AI prediction models for alien tactical responses, while another designed self-erasing data networks. Only the project directors understood how these pieces would eventually integrate into a comprehensive defense system. The scale of investment remained hidden within global budgets, distributed across thousands of seemingly unrelated programs. Materials research for Ghostwalker components appeared as civilian infrastructure projects. Advanced propulsion studies were classified as theoretical physics experiments. Weapons development occurred under the guise of asteroid defense systems. The patience required for this approach was unprecedented in galactic history. No other species had ever invested centuries into preparing for a conflict that might never occur. Project directors operated under strict protocols that limited technological testing to prevent detection. Components were tested in isolated systems light years from inhabited space, with all sensor data immediately encrypted and stored in secure archives. No full-scale integration testing ever occurred, as the energy signatures would have been detectable across sectors. The entire strategy relied on mathematical modeling and component-level validation rather than operational testing. This approach required accepting enormous operational risk in exchange for strategic surprise. Human military planners knew that if confrontation occurred before project completion, their conventional forces would be overwhelmed. But they also understood that revealing their capabilities prematurely would eliminate their only potential advantage against a technologically superior opponent. The gamble balanced immediate vulnerability against long-term survival. The project's existence represented humanity's fundamental understanding of galactic politics. Analysis of extinct civilizations showed that species who revealed their full capabilities either became targets for preemptive strikes or provoked arms races they couldn't win. The only sustainable strategy was to appear non-threatening while developing overwhelming retaliatory capacity. This required discipline that conquest-driven species like the Vexar could never comprehend. What made this approach devastatingly effective was its focus on systemic warfare rather than battlefield victory. Ghostwalker wasn't designed to win battles, it was engineered to erase civilizations. Every component integrated into a comprehensive system targeting enemy infrastructure, command networks, and psychological stability simultaneously. The project represented 3 centuries of calculated preparation for a single moment of absolute retaliation. The cargo ship Lucky Strike drifted through the outer Jupiter orbital zone, its course calculated with mathematical precision. This was not a random merchant route but a carefully plotted intercept path designed to cross known Vexar patrol sectors. Every aspect of the ship's appearance had been engineered for deception. Slightly outdated engine designs, minimal weapon mounts, and civilian-grade sensor packages. To any observer, it represented standard human commercial traffic, exactly the kind of vessel an expanding empire would target for intelligence gathering. Captain Bill Murphy stood on the bridge watching the approach vectors. He had undergone 3 years of psychological conditioning for this moment. Specialists had exposed him to simulated interrogations, stress inoculation techniques, and memory reinforcement protocols. His reactions had been calibrated to present specific emotional responses under pressure. Every possible question had been anticipated, every response rehearsed until it became instinct. His performance needed to be flawless under actual interrogation conditions. When the Vexar scouts appeared on sensors, Murphy followed his instructions precisely. He transmitted standard diplomatic greetings on open channels. He ordered minimal defensive posturing. He allowed the boarding party to capture his ship without meaningful resistance. His crew members, also trained for their roles, displayed appropriate fear and confusion during the capture process. The Vexar boarding teams found exactly what they expected: a poorly defended civilian vessel with minimal security protocols. During interrogation aboard the Vexar command ship, Murphy performed his role perfectly. He emphasized human technological limitations with carefully crafted statements. He described outdated weapon systems and defensive capabilities that matched Vexar intelligence estimates. His voice carried just the right mix of fear and forced bravery that predatory species expected from captured officers. He provided technical specifications that were technically accurate but strategically irrelevant, creating a portrait of a civilization that had advanced technology but lacked military application. The Vexar interrogators recorded every word, adding the information to their intelligence profiles. They noted how Murphy's descriptions matched their expectations of human development. His account of limited military capacity and decentralized command structures reinforced their assessment of an easy conquest. They never considered that a cargo captain would be delivering prepared disinformation as part of a centuries-long strategy. Their confidence in their interrogation techniques blinded them to the possibility of coordinated deception. Murphy's sacrifice provided invaluable data beyond the strategic deception. Hidden biometric sensors recorded Vexar physiological responses during interrogation. Concealed recording devices captured their questioning techniques and assessment methods. The entire encounter provided real-world validation of psychological profiles that had been developed through theoretical research. This information would later help human strategists predict Vexar decision-making patterns during actual combat operations. The choice of a merchant vessel for first contact served multiple purposes. It reinforced the image of humanity as a trade-oriented civilization rather than military expansionists. It provided plausible deniability if the operation was discovered prematurely. Most importantly, it played directly into Vexar psychological patterns. Predatory species consistently undervalued civilian assets while overvaluing military displays. They expected deception to come from warships, not cargo vessels. This operation demonstrated humanity's understanding of psychological warfare at a strategic level. They didn't just hide their capabilities, they actively shaped their enemy's perception through controlled interactions. The Vexar obtained exactly the intelligence they wanted to see, confirming their existing biases about human weakness. This initial misdirection would cost them dearly when actual hostilities began, as their tactical planning would be based on completely inaccurate assessments of human capabilities. The neutral station Kepler's Rest floated in the buffer zone between human and Vexar space. Its sterile corridors empty except for security teams from both sides. Ambassador Frank Russell entered the main conference room with carefully measured steps, his posture slightly slumped to appear less threatening. His clothing was intentionally conservative, lacking the decorative elements that might suggest cultural confidence or military backing. Every aspect of his presentation had been designed to signal vulnerability. Commander Yalak watched from across the table, his scaled hands resting on the polished surface. He studied Russell with the dispassionate evaluation of a predator assessing prey. "You will surrender your species immediately," Yalak announced without preamble. or we will demonstrate why resistance is futile." Russell responded by clasping his hands nervously, playing the part of a terrified negotiator perfectly. This controlled display of fear was the opening move in a carefully choreographed performance. Russell's team began feeding the Vexar completely fabricated technical data through secured data transfers. They presented specifications for outdated weapon systems that matched Vexar intelligence estimates. They showed defensive plans that emphasized protection of population centers rather than military targets. They provided exaggerated reports of internal political conflicts between Earth's governing bodies. Each piece of misinformation reinforced the Vexar assumption that humanity was divided and unprepared. With each manufactured revelation, Commander Yalak's contempt grew visibly. His responses became more dismissive, his body language more openly arrogant. He interrupted Russell's attempts at negotiation with declarations of Vexar superiority. The diplomatic team carefully recorded these reactions, adding to their psychological profiles of Vexar command behavior under conditions of perceived dominance. Every arrogant statement provided more data about their decision-making patterns. Russell described Earth's panic at the Vexar approach and humanity's desperate attempts to build defenses that everyone knew would be useless. He painted a picture of a species on the edge of surrender, held back only by stubborn pride. His voice carried just the right mix of fear and forced dignity that predatory species expected from inferior civilizations. The performance was calibrated to trigger specific responses based on 3 centuries of psychological research. The Vexar became convinced humans were ideal slave candidates. Their assessment concluded that humanity possessed sufficient technological capability to be useful, but lacked the military cohesion to resist domination. Commander Yalak's final declaration made this assessment clear. "There are no terms, mammal," he stated, slamming his fist on the table. "You will serve the Vexar Empire as slaves and soldiers. Your planet will become a breeding ground for future conquests. This is the only mercy you will receive." Throughout the meeting, Russell secretly recorded Vexar physiological responses to stress and confrontation. Hidden sensors captured heart rate variations, pupil dilation, and subtle muscle movements during negotiations. This data would later help human strategists predict Vexar reactions during actual combat operations. The psychological profiling extended beyond command decisions to fundamental biological responses under pressure. The transmission package delivered successfully marked mission completion. 7 hours after negotiations began, this coded message confirmed that the Vexar had accepted all manufactured intelligence and were proceeding with their predicted invasion plan. The diplomatic team had successfully reinforced every Vexar assumption about human weakness, while gathering critical intelligence about their opponents. The stage was now set for the next phase of the operation. Human diplomats deliberately portrayed their species as fragile and unprepared to exploit the Vexar's inherent overconfidence. Predatory civilizations consistently underestimated opponents who appeared weak, regarding them as unworthy of serious strategic consideration. By presenting humanity as divided and technologically inferior, the diplomatic team ensured the Vexar would commit to conventional invasion tactics rather than developing contingency plans. This approach guaranteed they would walk directly into prepared countermeasures without considering alternative strategies. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the main display in the Titan Command Center as system readiness indicators shifted from amber to green. Project Ghostwalker registered at 90% operational capacity across all primary systems. The reading represented 3 centuries of continuous development and preparation, now condensed into a single percentage point that would determine human survival. Her team monitored 72 separate subsystem integrations occurring simultaneously across the solar system. Each component had undergone isolated testing in deep space facilities, but they had never operated as a complete network. The full integration would require exactly 72 hours to complete, a window that could not be shortened without risking catastrophic system failure. The activation protocol remained locked behind multiple authorization layers. Project directives specified that only confirmed hostile intent could trigger full deployment. This safeguard prevented accidental escalation or premature revelation of capabilities. Vasquez's team had spent years developing assessment algorithms to evaluate alien communications and actions against established psychological profiles. The system needed absolute certainty before committing to a course of action that could not be reversed once initiated. Every component of Ghostwalker represented cutting-edge scientific advancement hidden from galactic observation. Dimensional phase weapons existed in theoretical research papers, but had never been built at scale. Stealth technology advanced beyond any known detection methods. Energy systems tapped into quantum fluctuations that conventional physics considered impossible to harness. These developments remained separate for security reasons. No single researcher understood more than their specialized component. The risk of catastrophic failure during full integration remained the project's greatest vulnerability. Humanity's entire strategy balanced on the timing of activation. Deploying too early would reveal capabilities before the network achieved full integration, allowing the Vexar to adapt or retreat. Waiting too long would risk conventional forces being overwhelmed before Ghostwalker could activate. The decision point required perfect synchronization with enemy movements and internal readiness. Vasquez's team ran continuous simulations comparing Vexar advance rates against integration timelines, adjusting projections every 30 seconds based on new sensor data. The authorization signal arrived 14 minutes after the Vexar ultimatum expired. Phase 2 activation cleared all security protocols simultaneously across 37 command centers. Vasquez initiated the sequence with biometric confirmation and voice authorization. Across the solar system, hidden facilities began powering up systems that had been dormant for decades. Energy signatures remained contained within specialized damping fields to prevent detection. The integration countdown began at exactly the moment Vexar forces entered the Sol system. This moment represented the culmination of 3 centuries of strategic planning. Generations of scientists and engineers had worked without knowing the full purpose of their research. Military planners had accepted vulnerability in the present to achieve overwhelming advantage in the future. The decision to activate meant accepting that conventional forces would absorb significant casualties during the integration period. This calculated sacrifice ensured the Vexar would remain committed to their invasion plan. Without suspecting the trap being set, the activation protocol transformed Ghostwalker from a collection of advanced components into a unified weapons system. Network integration allowed dimensional weapons to coordinate firing solutions across light years of space. Stealth systems began masking energy signatures from the developing network. AI tactical systems started analyzing Vexar movements in real time, developing engagement patterns based on psychological profiles obtained during first contact. The system began the methodical process of mapping every Vexar ship, base, and communication node for simultaneous engagement. Project Ghostwalker represented humanity's ultimate strategic advantage, not because of its destructive capacity, but because of its completely unexpected nature. No species in recorded galactic history had ever developed capabilities in complete secrecy while presenting a false technological profile. The Vexar assessment of human technology was off by approximately 270 years of advancement. This discrepancy would prove fatal to their military operations, as their tactical planning assumed technological parity at best. The activation marked the point where humanity transitioned from appearing vulnerable to becoming strategically dominant. The Vexar invasion fleet entered the Sol system with perfect formation, their ships moving in synchronized attack patterns developed over a century of conquest. Initial scans showed minimal human defensive deployments around the colony world. Orbital platforms appeared underpowered and poorly maintained. Patrol ships registered outdated weapon signatures and limited sensor capabilities. The system presented exactly the profile Vexar. Intelligence had predicted a minimally defended outpost with insufficient resources to resist serious assault. Human defense forces engaged the invaders with apparent desperation. Their counterattacks lacked coordination, with ships firing from ineffective ranges and breaking formation under minimal pressure. Orbital platforms activated defensive screens that flickered and failed after absorbing only a few shots from Vexar energy weapons. Evacuation shuttles launched in chaotic patterns, some colliding in their panic to escape the advancing fleet. All sensor data transmitted the image of a civilization on the verge of collapse. Every apparent failure served a calculated purpose. The Sol system had been prepared for this exact scenario over 3 decades of covert development. Defense platforms mounted actual weapons beneath false housings that projected weaker energy signatures. Patrol ships ran on advanced drives masked to appear as outdated models. The evacuation procedures followed carefully designed routes that appeared chaotic to outside observers but actually cleared specific engagement zones for future operations. Captain Lisa Park's destroyer group executed their orders with precision. They deliberately exposed flank armor to Vexar targeting systems. They fired weapons at ranges guaranteed to be ineffective against Vexar shields. They transmitted distress calls on open channels describing system failures and crew casualties. Each action reinforced the Vexar assessment of human technological inferiority. The invading forces saw only what their experience told them to expect, another easy conquest against the inferior species. The retreat patterns drew Vexar ships into predetermined engagement zones. Human vessels fell back toward specific gravitational anomalies and radiation fields that would later provide tactical advantages. They abandoned defensive positions that had been pre-targeted for later artillery strikes. Every movement created future firing solutions and attack vectors, while appearing to be desperate attempts to escape destruction. Vexar command ships tracked the apparent route with satisfaction. Their tactical displays showed human forces collapsing across the entire system. Invasion troops began landing operations on the colony's surface, meeting only sporadic resistance from seemingly disorganized defensive forces. All indicators confirmed their initial assessment of human weakness. They advanced according to standard conquest protocols, unaware they were moving into a carefully prepared testing ground. The entire engagement served as the final validation of Vexar psychological profiles. Their predictable responses to apparent weakness confirmed 3 centuries of human research into predator species behavior. Every ship that pursued retreating human forces, every troop deployment, every communication followed patterns that had been anticipated and mapped years in advance. The Sol system became a live-fire exercise in manipulating an enemy's decision-making process. Human commanders watched from hidden observation posts, collecting data on Vexar combat formations and response times. They noted how the invaders committed their reserves exactly when predicted. They recorded the specific patterns of their assault waves and the timing of their orbital bombardments. This real-time intelligence would later enable precise counterattacks against their operational rhythms. The Vexar saw only the surface appearance of easy conquest because their experience had never prepared them for coordinated strategic deception. Their century of unchallenged expansion had conditioned them to interpret resistance in terms of immediate tactical capability, rather than long-term strategic planning. They assessed the Sol system defense through the lens of their previous conquests, missing the underlying patterns that indicated a completely different reality. This blindness to deception tactics would prove fatal. As the Vexar consolidated their control over the system, they actually positioned themselves for the counterstroke that would begin moments after Ghostwalker achieved full activation. Their confidence in an easy victory became the mechanism of their eventual destruction. As they had willingly entered the exact engagement zones human strategists had prepared for their eradication. Captain Lisa Park stood on the bridge of her command ship, watching the Vexar advance through the Sol system. Her orders were explicit and uncompromising, lose convincingly. Her 37 ships mimicked outdated human technology perfectly. Their energy signatures matched obsolete drive systems. Their weapon outputs registered as primitive projectile systems. Their shield emissions appeared weak and unstable. Every aspect of their presentation reinforced the Vexar assessment of technological inferiority. The engagement began with deliberate miscalculations. Park's ships fired from maximum range, where weapons would be least effective against Vexar shielding. They launched missiles in patterns that allowed easy interception. Their evasion maneuvers exposed critical system components to enemy targeting. Each action appeared to be desperate attempts at resistance from an overwhelmed force. The Vexar responded with predictable precision, their attacks following established combat doctrines. Every engagement provided critical sensor data on Vexar combat patterns. Hidden recording systems captured shield frequency modulations. Weapons discharge signatures were analyzed for power cycling patterns. Movement algorithms were mapped for predictive modeling. The ships transmitted this intelligence through secured quantum channels to command centers light years away. Human analysts studied the data in real time, updating tactical profiles with each exchange. The destruction sequences were carefully staged simulations. When ships appeared to be destroyed, they actually activated advanced stealth systems and damage control protocols. Emergency beacon signals mimicked catastrophic reactor failures. Escape pod launches followed programmed trajectories that appeared random, but actually placed recovery teams in optimal positions. The crews had evacuated hours before battle through concealed transportation systems, leaving automated systems to perform the necessary deception. Vexar Command celebrated each apparent victory without suspicion. Their tactical displays showed human forces being systematically eliminated. Communication channels filled with reports of successful engagements and minimal casualties. They interpreted the patterned resistance as confirmation of human technological limitations. Their overconfidence prevented them from questioning why every encounter followed such predictable parameters. Human commanders observed the entire battle as a comprehensive data collection exercise. They noted how Vexar ships consistently pursued retreating vessels in specific formation patterns. They recorded the exact trigger points when the invaders committed their reserve forces. They mapped the communication protocols used between command ships and attack formations. This intelligence revealed vulnerabilities in their operational coordination. The Vexar combat doctrine became completely transparent through their actions. They favored overwhelming force applied in sequential waves rather than adaptive tactics. They relied on technological superiority rather than strategic innovation. Their command structure showed rigidity in responding to unexpected situations. These patterns matched psychological profiles developed during 3 centuries of research into predator species behavior. The staged defeats served multiple strategic purposes beyond intelligence gathering. They drew Vexar forces into predetermined engagement zones prepared for later operations. They consumed enemy munitions and fuel reserves without requiring meaningful human losses. They established combat rhythms that would later be exploited during counterattacks. Most importantly, they reinforced the Vexar's fatal overconfidence in their assessment of human capabilities. This approach demonstrated humanity's understanding of psychological warfare at the operational level. They recognize that predator species become most vulnerable when they believe they have achieved dominance. The Vexar's celebration of apparent victories actually marked the point where they became most susceptible to counterattack. Their certainty about human weakness became the weapon that would enable their destruction. The transmission, Protocol 7, authorization confirmed, appeared simultaneously across 37 command centers. The message marked the transition from passive observation to active engagement. Human forces immediately ceased their retreat patterns and began synchronized counterattacks across all sectors. Vessel formations that had appeared scattered and disorganized moments earlier now moved with precise coordination. The shift occurred so rapidly that Vexar tactical displays couldn't update quickly enough to track the new deployment patterns. The follow-up transmission. The pack hunts tonight initiated the psychological warfare phase. Human ships emerged from stealth positions that had been prepared years in advance. Ambush teams activated from asteroid fields, gas cloud formations, and gravitational shadow zones. These positions had been chosen specifically to isolate Vexar units from supporting elements. The attacking forces moved with coordination that indicated extensive rehearsal of these exact scenarios. Vexar units suddenly found themselves cut off from command networks and surrounded by enemies appearing from unexpected directions. Their communication channels flooded with confusion and distress calls as the tactical situation reversed completely. Ships that had been pursuing retreating human vessels now found themselves trapped in crossfire patterns. Ground forces that had been advancing against minimal resistance encountered fortified positions and prepared kill zones. The psychological impact on the Vexar was immediate and severe. As a species that had never experienced being hunted, they lacked the psychological framework to process the reversal. Their tactical responses became erratic and uncoordinated. Some units attempted to maintain formation while others broke ranks in panic. The predictable nature of their reactions made them easy targets for human countermeasures, designed specifically around their known behavioral patterns. Human forces employed captured Vexar communication equipment to disseminate false orders and create additional confusion. They studied alien protocols and chain of command structures to turn the Vexar's own efficiency against them. This tactic caused some units to freeze in place while others began firing on their own troops suspecting treachery. The disruption of their command hierarchy accelerated the breakdown of their combat effectiveness. The urban environments became particularly effective traps for the ground forces. Human soldiers had converted city layouts into channeling systems that directed Vexar troops into prepared kill zones. Every building entrance, street corner, and underground passage served a tactical purpose. The Vexar, accustomed to direct confrontations, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to engage in conventional warfare. This approach exploited the fundamental weakness of predator psychology. The Vexar had never developed contingency plans for situations where they weren't the dominant force. Their training emphasized overwhelming offense rather than adaptive defense. When faced with an enemy that understood their tactics better than they did themselves, their decision-making processes collapsed under the pressure. Human analysts had anticipated this psychological vulnerability based on centuries of research into predator species behavior. They understood that conqueror civilizations develop specific blind spots regarding their own vulnerabilities. The sudden transition from hunter to hunted triggered cognitive dissonance that the Vexar command structure couldn't overcome. Their arrogance and belief in inherent superiority became the weapon that destroyed their combat. Effectiveness: the coordinated attacks focused on creating maximum psychological impact alongside physical destruction. Human forces targeted command ships first to eliminate leadership. They disrupted communication networks to prevent coordination of countermeasures. They systematically dismantled the Vexar's ability to understand or respond to the changing battlefield conditions. This approach treated the battle as an extermination operation rather than a conventional military engagement. The Vexar's century of unchallenged conquest had left them completely unprepared for an enemy that fought through deception and psychological manipulation. Their warriors had been trained to expect either surrender or direct confrontation. The concept of an enemy that would study them for centuries and then use their own psychology against them was beyond their strategic planning. This gap in their understanding proved fatal when facing humanity's methodical approach to warfare. Captain Lisa Park stood on the bridge of her command ship, watching the Vexar advance through the Sol system. Her orders were explicit and uncompromising. Lose convincingly. Her 37 ships mimicked outdated human technology perfectly. Their energy signatures matched obsolete drive systems. Their weapon outputs registered as primitive projectile systems. Their shield emissions appeared weak and unstable. Every aspect of their presentation reinforced the Vexar assessment of technological inferiority. The engagement began with deliberate miscalculations. Park's ships fired from maximum range where weapons would be least effective against Vexar shielding. They launched missiles in patterns that allowed easy interception. Their evasion maneuvers exposed critical system components to enemy targeting. Each action appeared to be desperate attempts at resistance from an overwhelmed force. The Vexar responded with predictable precision, their attacks following established combat doctrines. Every engagement provided critical sensor data on Vexar combat patterns. Hidden recording systems captured shield frequency modulations. Weapons discharge signatures were analyzed for power cycling patterns. Movement algorithms were mapped for predictive modeling. The ships transmitted this intelligence through secured quantum channels to command centers light years away. Human analysts studied the data in real time, updating tactical profiles with each exchange. The destruction sequences were carefully staged simulations. When ships appeared to be destroyed, they actually activated advanced stealth systems and damage control protocols. Emergency beacon signals mimicked catastrophic reactor failures. Escape pod launches followed programmed trajectories that appeared random, but actually placed recovery teams in optimal positions. The crews had evacuated hours before battle through concealed transportation systems, leaving automated systems to perform the necessary deception. Vexar Command celebrated each apparent victory without suspicion. Their tactical displays showed human forces being systematically eliminated. Communication channels filled with reports of successful engagements and minimal casualties. They interpreted the patterned resistance as confirmation of human technological limitations. Their overconfidence prevented them from questioning why every encounter followed such predictable parameters. Human commanders observed the entire battle as a comprehensive data collection exercise. They noted how Vexar ships consistently pursued retreating vessels in specific formation patterns. They recorded the exact trigger points when the invaders committed their reserve forces. They mapped the communication protocols used between command ships and attack formations. This intelligence revealed vulnerabilities in their operational coordination. The Vexar combat doctrine became completely transparent through their actions. They favored overwhelming force applied in sequential waves rather than adaptive tactics. They relied on technological superiority rather than strategic innovation. Their command structure showed rigidity in responding to unexpected situations. These patterns matched psychological profiles developed during 3 centuries of research into predator species behavior. The staged defeats served multiple strategic purposes beyond intelligence gathering. They drew Vexar forces into predetermined engagement zones prepared for later operations. They consumed enemy munitions and fuel reserves without requiring meaningful human losses. They established combat rhythms that would later be exploited during counterattacks. Most importantly, they reinforced the Vexar's fatal overconfidence in their assessment of human capabilities. This approach demonstrated humanity's understanding of psychological warfare at the operational level. They recognize that predator species become most vulnerable when they believe they have achieved dominance. The Vexar's celebration of apparent victories actually marked the point where they became most susceptible to counterattack. Their certainty about human weakness became the weapon that would enable their destruction. The transmission, Protocol 7, authorization confirmed, appeared simultaneously across 37 command centers. The message marked the transition from passive observation to active engagement. Human forces immediately ceased their retreat patterns and began synchronized counterattacks across all sectors. Vessel formations that had appeared scattered and disorganized moments earlier now moved with precise coordination. The shift occurred so rapidly that Vexar tactical displays couldn't update quickly enough to track the new deployment patterns. The follow-up transmission. The pack hunts tonight initiated the psychological warfare phase. Human ships emerged from stealth positions that had been prepared years in advance. Ambush teams activated from asteroid fields, gas cloud formations, and gravitational shadow zones. These positions had been chosen specifically to isolate Vexar units from supporting elements. The attacking forces moved with coordination that indicated extensive rehearsal of these exact scenarios. Vexar units suddenly found themselves cut off from command networks and surrounded by enemies appearing from unexpected directions. Their communication channels flooded with confusion and distress calls. As the tactical situation reversed completely, ships that had been pursuing retreating human vessels now found themselves trapped in crossfire patterns. Ground forces that had been advancing against minimal resistance encountered fortified positions and prepared kill zones. The psychological impact on the Vexar was immediate and severe. As a species that had never experienced being hunted, they lacked the psychological framework to process the reversal. Their tactical responses became erratic and uncoordinated. Some units attempted to maintain formation while others broke ranks in panic. The predictable nature of their reactions made them easy targets for human countermeasures, designed specifically around their known behavioral patterns. Human forces employed captured, Vexar communication equipment to disseminate false orders and create additional confusion. They studied alien protocols and chain of command structures to turn the Vexar's own efficiency against them. This tactic caused some units to freeze in place while others began firing on their own troops suspecting treachery. The disruption of their command hierarchy accelerated the breakdown of their combat effectiveness. The urban environments became particularly effective traps for the ground forces. Human soldiers had converted city layouts into channeling systems that directed Vexar troops into prepared kill zones. Every building entrance, street corner, and underground passage served a tactical purpose. The Vexar, accustomed to direct confrontations, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to engage in conventional warfare. This approach exploited the fundamental weakness of predator psychology. The Vexar had never developed contingency plans for situations where they weren't the dominant force. Their training emphasized overwhelming offense rather than adaptive defense. When faced with an enemy that understood their tactics better than they did themselves, their decision-making processes collapsed under the pressure. Human analysts had anticipated this psychological vulnerability based on centuries of research into predator species behavior. They understood that conqueror civilizations develop specific blind spots regarding their own vulnerabilities. The sudden transition from hunter to hunted triggered cognitive dissonance that the Vexar command structure couldn't overcome. Their arrogance and belief in inherent superiority became the weapon that destroyed their combat effectiveness. The coordinated attacks focused on Creating maximum psychological impact alongside physical destruction, human forces targeted command ships first to eliminate leadership. They disrupted communication networks to prevent coordination of countermeasures. They systematically dismantled the Vexar's ability to understand or respond to the changing battlefield conditions. This approach treated the battle as an extermination operation rather than a conventional military engagement. The Vexar's century of unchallenged conquest had left them completely unprepared for an enemy that fought through deception and psychological manipulation. Their warriors had been trained to expect either surrender or direct confrontation. The concept of an enemy that would study them for centuries and then use their own psychology against them was beyond their strategic planning. This gap in their understanding proved fatal when facing humanity's methodical approach to warfare. The Nightfall-class destroyers materialized from stealth positions, their matte black hulls appearing without energy signatures or drive emissions. These vessels represented humanity's technological peak, weapon systems developed over 3 centuries of concealed research. Their primary armament fired projectiles that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, a capability that rendered conventional defense systems obsolete. This technological approach bypassed physical matter and energy barriers by operating outside normal space-time constraints. Vexar sensors registered no incoming fire until the impacts occurred. Quantum phase shields designed to deflect energy weapons and physical projectiles offered no protection. The weapons struck targets by appearing inside shielded areas without passing through defensive barriers. Sensor operators on Vexar ships reported impossible readings, energy signatures that appeared and disappeared across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. Their tracking systems couldn't establish firing vectors or predict impact points. The Eternal Dominion took 3 direct hits from unknown weapons within the first minute of engagement. The flagship shuddered violently as systems failed across multiple decks. Damage control teams reported hull breaches that defied conventional explanation. The attack seemed to ignore armor plating and internal bulkheads. The Vexar tactical officer confirmed the energy signatures didn't match anything in their databases. This represented technology centuries beyond their intelligence estimates of human capability. Human forces had developed these weapons specifically to counter Vexar defensive advantages. Research into multidimensional physics had revealed methods to bypass quantum phase shielding entirely. The Nightfall-class ships could deliver destructive energy across dimensional boundaries, making defense impossible through conventional means. This approach turned the Vexar's greatest technological advantage into their most critical vulnerability. The technological gap proved absolute and insurmountable. Vexar engineers couldn't develop countermeasures because they couldn't analyze the weapon's operating principles. Their attempts to strengthen shields or modify frequencies had no effect on the multidimensional attacks. Command ships that had previously seemed invulnerable now suffered catastrophic damage with each impact. The psychological impact of this technological surprise accelerated the breakdown of their command structure. This capability demonstrated the effectiveness of humanity's long-term preparation strategy. While the Vexar focused on expanding their empire through visible conquest, human scientists had explored theoretical physics that other species considered impossible to weaponize. The 3-century development timeline allowed for fundamental research that couldn't be rushed or discovered through conventional military advancement. This patient approach yielded capabilities that no expansion-driven civilization could anticipate. The Nightfall-class ships engaged with systematic precision, targeting command vessels and strategic assets first. Each attack provided more data on Vexar vulnerability patterns. Human tacticians adjusted their targeting based on real-time analysis of enemy responses. The complete inability of the Vexar to understand or counter the new weapons created cascading failures across their fleet coordination. Ships that attempted to regroup found themselves isolated and destroyed. This technological revelation marked the turning point where the conflict shifted from military engagement to systematic eradication. The Vexar had based their entire strategy on technological superiority that no longer existed. Their combat doctrines assumed defensive capabilities that were now completely ineffective. The multidimensional weapons allowed human forces to dismantle their military infrastructure without facing meaningful resistance. The development represented humanity's understanding that true strategic advantage comes from fundamental scientific advancement rather than incremental improvement of existing technology. By exploring physics beyond conventional military applications, they achieved capabilities that their opponents couldn't comprehend or counter. This approach ensured that when confrontation finally occurred, the technological disparity would be too great to overcome through adaptation or innovation. Human engineering teams moved through captured Vexar vessels within minutes of securing each location. Their priority was immediate technology acquisition rather than tactical assessment. Specialized equipment allowed rapid analysis of alien systems without triggering security protocols. The teams worked with practiced efficiency, having trained for this exact scenario using captured technology from previous encounters. Their methods combined technical skill with psychological understanding of Vexar design philosophy. They focused first on communication and sensor systems. Vexar technology relied on standardized protocols across their entire fleet. This consistency made reverse engineering possible despite the technology's advanced nature. Human engineers mapped command structures and frequency modulations within hours of access. They identified emergency broadcast channels and distress signal protocols. This knowledge provided the means to manipulate Vexar responses across the battle space. Within 3 hours of the first capture, human forces broadcast fabricated emergency signals using captured equipment. The transmissions mimicked Vexar command voices with perfect accuracy. They reported cruiser groups under attack and requested immediate assistance at specific coordinates. The signals followed all proper authentication protocols and used correct encryption keys. Vexar rescue teams responded without questioning the authenticity of the distress calls. These fabricated emergencies drew Vexar units into prepared ambush zones. Rescue ships arrived to find waiting human forces instead of damaged comrades. The traps utilized multidimensional weapons that eliminated targets before they could transmit warnings. Each successful ambush provided additional technology for analysis and repurposing. The cycle continued with increasing efficiency as human understanding of Vexar systems deepened. The systematic turning of Vexar technology against its creators demonstrated human adaptability at its most effective. Engineers reprogrammed weapon systems to target Vexar energy signatures. They modified sensor arrays to feed false information to remaining Vexar vessels. Communication equipment broadcast conflicting orders to different fleet elements. This approach exploited the Vexar's rigid command structure and dependence on technological superiority. Every captured piece of equipment opened new strategic opportunities. Dropships were reprogrammed to deliver human assault teams behind enemy lines. Command consoles provided access to tactical networks and deployment schedules. Shield generators were modified to create false sensor images of human ship movements. The technological capture operation became self-sustaining, as each success provided resources for the next phase. The Vexar response revealed their psychological vulnerability to technological betrayal. Their warriors hesitated to use equipment that might have been compromised. Commanders delayed decisions while verifying system integrity. This paralysis created critical gaps in their defensive coordination. Units that had operated with perfect synchronization now moved with uncertainty and suspicion. This loss of trust in their own systems accelerated the Vexar collapse. Ships failed to respond to legitimate orders while others followed fabricated commands into ambushes. The technological foundation of their military dominance became their greatest liability. Their rigid doctrine left no room for adapting to compromised systems or unconventional warfare methods. Human forces demonstrated superior flexibility in their approach to captured technology. They treated each new system as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a threat to be contained. This mindset allowed rapid innovation and improvisation that the Vexar couldn't counter. Their centuries of preparation included developing methodologies for technology, repurposing under combat conditions. The technological turnaround operation highlighted the fundamental difference in strategic thinking between the two species. The Vexar viewed technology as a static advantage to be maintained. Humanity treated it as a dynamic resource to be adapted and improved. This philosophical divergence proved decisive when human engineers turned the invaders' own systems against them with devastating effectiveness. Humanity turned Vexar overconfidence into vulnerability by understanding that technological superiority creates dependence. The invaders had built their entire military doctrine around equipment they believed couldn't be compromised or replicated. When human forces demonstrated they could not only understand but improve upon that technology, the psychological impact proved more damaging than the physical destruction. Ghostwalker's full activation initiated the systematic deconstruction of Vexar civilization. Matter deletion weapons targeted every level of their infrastructure simultaneously. Ships vanished from tactical displays without energy signatures or debris fields. Orbital platforms disappeared from sensor readings as if they had never existed. Communication networks failed across 37 systems within minutes of activation. The attacks focused on complete eradication rather than military defeat, targeting the foundation of Vexar society rather than just their military forces. Quantum-level manipulation scrambled command structures beyond recovery. Command ships lost the ability to coordinate fleet movements. Ground forces received conflicting orders from compromised networks. The systematic approach ensured no aspect of Vexar civilization could function normally. The scale of destruction was both precise and comprehensive, targeting specific elements while leaving surrounding structures intact. This surgical precision demonstrated advanced targeting capabilities that conventional weapons couldn't achieve. Vexar forces found themselves unable to retreat or regroup as support systems failed. Ships attempting to jump to slipspace found their drives non-functional. Ground units discovered their transportation networks had been disabled. Supply chains collapsed as storage facilities and manufacturing centers were systematically erased. The Empire was being unmade from within by forces they couldn't see or understand. Their technological superiority became meaningless against weapons that operated on completely different principles. The process followed a methodical pattern, established during 3 centuries of planning. Human operators worked from hidden command centers, coordinating the eradication across light years of space. They targeted military assets first to prevent organized resistance. Industrial centers were eliminated next to destroy manufacturing capacity. Population centers received final attention, once the ability to respond had been neutralized. Each phase built upon the previous one to ensure complete systemic collapse. No aspect of Vexar civilization was spared from the deletion process. Historical records were erased from databanks. Cultural artifacts stored in digital formats were systematically purged. Even physical structures were targeted with matter conversion weapons that left no residue. The approach ensured that recovery or reconstruction would be impossible. This represented a level of thoroughness that the galaxy had never witnessed before in conflict. The terrifying capability Ghostwalker unleashed was complete dimensional erasure. Weapons operated across multiple realities simultaneously, affecting targets on quantum levels. This allowed deletion of matter and energy without conventional destructive effects. Ships didn't explode, they simply ceased to exist across all observable dimensions. The technology bypassed all known defensive systems because it didn't interact with them in conventional ways. This capability represented humanity's understanding that some threats require permanent solutions. The Vexar had demonstrated through a century of conquest that they couldn't be reasoned with or contained. Their psychological profile indicated they would always seek dominance through aggression. Complete eradication became the only option that guaranteed long-term security. The methodical approach ensured the job would be done thoroughly. The process remained clinical and detached throughout its execution. Human operators monitored progress through automated systems rather than direct observation. Decision-making followed established protocols rather than emotional responses. This emotional distance allowed for complete focus on the tactical objectives without moral hesitation. The operation proceeded with the efficiency of a surgical procedure, rather than the passion of combat. The absolute nature of the deletion process sent a clear message to the rest of the galaxy. Humanity had demonstrated capability beyond any previously recorded civilization. They had shown restraint by not using this power for conquest or expansion. But they had also made clear that certain actions would trigger absolute response. This balance between capability and restraint established a new paradigm for interstellar relations. The systemic deconstruction continued until every verified Vexar presence had been eliminated. Follow-up scans confirmed the complete absence of their technology and biological signatures. The process left no debris fields or residual radiation. Only empty space remained where their empire had existed hours before. The thoroughness of the operation ensured that even memory of their civilization would fade with time. The Eternal Dominion drifted in the void, its massive frame surrounded by the fading energy signatures of its destroyed escort fleet. Supreme Commander Thra watched his tactical display as the last defensive positions collapsed. Human forces applied pressure from multiple dimensions simultaneously, their attacks bypassing conventional defenses. The flagship's quantum phase shields flickered under impacts that registered on no sensors. Internal systems failed across dozens of decks as multidimensional weapons disrupted essential functions. Thra's command chair displays showed cascading system failures. Engineering reported power systems collapsing without apparent cause. Weapons control lost targeting solutions as sensor arrays provided conflicting data. The realization struck him with brutal clarity. Humanity wasn't fighting for victory but conducting systematic extermination. This was no military engagement but a clinical removal operation. Their approach showed precision that indicated centuries of preparation. The flagship's destruction began with the main drive systems. Energy readings spiked across multiple dimensions before the engine simply ceased to exist. The effects spread through the ship like an unraveling pattern. Hull sections disappeared without explosive decompression. Command decks lost atmosphere and perfect silence as matter conversion weapons erased bulkheads and support structures. There were no emergency alarms because the systems that would trigger them vanished first. Human forces maintained their assault with methodical precision. Nightfall-class destroyers coordinated fire patterns that targeted structural integrity points. They avoided catastrophic explosions that might damage intelligence-gathering opportunities. Their priority was complete eradication, but they conducted it with surgical precision that maximized intelligence recovery first. The approach demonstrated absolute control over the battlefield. The Eternal Dominion's final moments represented the Empire's complete collapse. Thra's last transmission never reached remaining forces. Communication arrays dissolved into quantum foam before the message could transmit. The flagship broke apart along pre-weakened structural lines, each section disappearing into multidimensional space. The destruction left no debris field or residual radiation, only empty space where the command vessel had existed. No surrender was offered during the engagement. Human commanders followed protocols established 3 centuries earlier. The Vexar had been classified as a Class 1 extinction threat after analysis of their conquest patterns. This designation mandated complete eradication without negotiation. The assessment concluded that predator species of their psychological profile could never be contained or reformed. Permanent removal became the only acceptable outcome. The battle ended with absolute silence across all frequencies. Military channels that had carried Vexar communications now showed zero activity. Sensor sweeps detected no energy signatures or drive emissions from remaining vessels. Human cleanup operations began immediately, using multidimensional scanning to verify complete eradication. The process ensured no ship, no station, no individual survived the engagement. This systematic approach to eradication demonstrated humanity's understanding of existential threats. They had studied enough fallen civilizations to recognize patterns that led to extinction. The Vexar displayed all the characteristics of a species that would always seek dominance through aggression. Their psychological profile indicated they would never accept coexistence with potential rivals. This assessment justified the extreme response. The completeness of the eradication served multiple strategic purposes. It eliminated any possibility of future retaliation from surviving elements. It demonstrated to other species the consequences of similar aggression. It established that humanity would invest whatever resources necessary to ensure permanent security. The message was clear but unspoken. Certain actions would trigger absolute response. Humanity achieved this through coordinated application of advanced technology and psychological warfare. They understood that military victory alone couldn't guarantee security against a predator species. Complete removal required attacking the enemy's ability to function at every level: military, industrial, and psychological. This multidimensional approach ensured no recovery was possible. The silence that followed represented more than military victory. It marked the end of a civilization that had threatened galactic stability for a century. It demonstrated that preparation and patience could overcome brute force and aggression. It established a new standard for conflict resolution, where survival meant understanding enemies better than they understood themselves. Dr. Rachel Cooper entered the Galactic Council chamber, with a calm demeanor that contrasted sharply with recent events. She took her position at the human delegation station, adjusting the microphone with deliberate movements. Her presentation, opened with standard diplomatic greetings and expressions of peaceful intent. She spoke of humanity's desire for cooperative relations and mutual economic development. Her tone remained measured and professional throughout the initial statements. The assembled ambassadors watched with careful attention. They represented species that had witnessed the Vexar Empire's rapid expansion and sudden disappearance. Their intelligence networks had detected the complete eradication of a civilization that had dominated 37 systems. Dr. Cooper's peaceful presentation created a deliberate dissonance with what they knew had occurred. She outlined humanity's interest in scientific exchange and cultural dialogue. She proposed joint research initiatives and trade agreements. Her language emphasized collaboration rather than confrontation. This approach reinforced the image of a species focused on development rather than domination. The performance was calculated to establish a specific psychological impression. The ambassadors understood the unspoken message perfectly. Humanity had demonstrated overwhelming capability by eliminating the Vexar threat completely. They had shown restraint by not claiming conquered territories or demanding tribute. This combination established a new type of galactic power dynamic. Respect for human capabilities now mixed with awareness of their capacity for absolute response. When Ambassador Keeler of the Zepyrian Republic asked about the Vexar Empire's fate, Dr. Cooper responded with practiced calm. She stated that humanity had no information about such a species and that no civilization matching that description had ever existed. This answer carried implications beyond the words themselves. It suggested that humanity could make entire civilizations disappear so completely that questioning their existence became meaningless. Her assurance that humanity had no interest in conquest or domination served multiple purposes. It provided reassurance to neutral species while establishing clear boundaries. It emphasized that human power would remain defensive rather than expansionist. This position created stability while maintaining strategic advantage. The message balanced capability with intentional limitation. The galactic community now saw humans as both protectors and potential predators. They had eliminated a threat to galactic stability without becoming conquerors themselves. This dual nature established a foundation for long-term security. Other civilizations understood that humanity would defend its interests with absolute commitment, but wouldn't seek unnecessary conflict. Dr. Cooper's presentation concluded with formal offers of diplomatic exchange programs and technology sharing. These gestures reinforced the image of a species seeking integration rather than isolation. The offers carried credibility because they followed demonstrated capability. Other species could engage with confidence that humanity could enforce agreements if necessary. The session ended with ambassadors filing out in contemplative silence. They carried the understanding that galactic politics had fundamentally changed. A new power had emerged that combined overwhelming capability with strategic restraint. This combination created stability through demonstrated competence rather than through threats or aggression. Humanity's message to the Galactic Council was clear through both words and actions. They would engage as peaceful partners while maintaining absolute security. They would eliminate threats completely, but wouldn't seek dominion. This approach established a balance that respected other civilizations while ensuring human survival. The galaxy now operated under new rules that favored preparation over aggression and strategy over spectacle. Humanity didn't conquer its way to the top, it prepared its way there. The concept of an apex predator shifted from brute strength to strategic patience. True power no longer meant displaying the largest fleet or the most aggressive warriors. It meant investing 3 centuries in silent preparation while appearing completely vulnerable. The galaxy learned that when humans identify a threat, they approach it with methodical precision rather than emotional reaction. This redefinition of power created a new galactic order based on capability rather than intimidation. The Vexar represented the old model of predatory expansion, visible conquest through overwhelming force. They measured strength in immediate military superiority and territorial control. Humanity demonstrated that lasting security comes from understanding enemies better than they understand themselves. Project Ghostwalker wasn't about building bigger weapons, but about developing complete strategic advantage. This approach focused on eliminating threats permanently, rather than engaging in repeated conflicts. Humanity's transformation from apparent prey to ultimate power stemmed from psychological insight. They recognized that predator species develop specific blind spots regarding their own vulnerabilities. The Vexar's century of unchallenged conquest made them overconfident in their assessment capabilities. They evaluated civilizations based on visible technology and military deployments. This narrow perspective prevented them from recognizing strategic deception occurring across generations. The 3-century preparation timeline provided critical advantages that rapid expansion couldn't match. Human scientists developed weapons operating on physical principles other species hadn't considered practical. Psychologists mapped predator decision-making patterns under stress. Sociologists studied how conquered civilizations maintained resistance movements. This comprehensive approach created capabilities that couldn't be developed through conventional military advancement. Humanity's subsequent offer of peaceful relations established a new power dynamic. They eliminated the threat completely, but didn't claim conquered territories or demand tribute. This combination of overwhelming capability and strategic restraint created stability through demonstrated competence. Other civilizations understood that humanity would enforce agreements but wouldn't seek unnecessary conflict. The galaxy gained a guardian that preferred peace but could guarantee security. The cost of this approach was absolute in its execution, but resulted in lasting peace. Human strategists accepted that some threats require permanent solutions rather than temporary containment. The Vexar psychological profile indicated they would always seek dominance through aggression. This assessment justified the extreme response while establishing deterrence for future conflicts. The message was clear without being explicitly stated. Certain actions would trigger absolute consequences. Humanity became the unseen guardian through its preference for preparation over display. Their power remained mostly invisible until required, creating stability without constant intimidation. This approach allowed other civilizations to develop without fear of human expansion, while understanding the boundaries of acceptable behavior. The balance between capability and restraint became the foundation of galactic politics. The transformation from easy prey to apex power demonstrated that strategic patience outperforms immediate aggression. Humanity's victory proved that understanding psychology matters more than deploying superior technology. Their approach showed that true security comes from long-term planning rather than short-term dominance. This redefinition of power established a galactic order where preparation became the ultimate advantage. Earth's rise to galactic prominence wasn't achieved through conquest but through calculated preparedness. The human strategy focused on eliminating existential threats completely rather than managing them periodically. This approach required accepting vulnerability in the present to achieve overwhelming advantage in the future. The result was a stable, galactic order where humanity served as ultimate arbiter through demonstrated capability rather than declared authority. The galaxy learned that the most dangerous predators aren't those who display power constantly, but those who develop it silently. Humanity's 3-century preparation achieved what immediate aggression could not: permanent security through absolute capability. This redefinition of apex predator status shifted galactic politics from domination through force to stability through preparedness. The transformation established that true power lies in strategic foresight rather than military spectacle. The Vexar psychological framework deteriorated under coordinated human tactics designed to exploit predator vulnerabilities. Their evolutionary development had never included the experience of being hunted. As a species that achieved dominance through aggression and expansion, they lacked the cognitive tools to process role reversal. This inherent weakness became their critical strategic liability when facing an opponent that understood their psychological profile better than they understood themselves. Human military planners developed engagement protocols specifically targeting predator psychology. They utilized confusion and disorientation as primary weapons against the Vexar command structure. The sudden transition from hunter to hunted created cognitive dissonance that disrupted decision-making processes. Vexar units that had operated with perfect synchronization began making fundamental tactical errors under psychological pressure. Their ingrained arrogance prevented rapid adaptation to the changing combat environment. Commanders continued issuing orders based on outdated tactical assumptions, despite mounting evidence of their ineffectiveness. The psychological rigidity that served them during conquest became a liability when facing unconventional warfare. They couldn't comprehend an enemy that valued strategic deception over direct confrontation. This psychological warfare proved more devastating than any technological advantage. Human forces used captured communication equipment to broadcast conflicting orders across Vexar networks. They created situations where units received contradictory instructions from what appeared to be legitimate command sources. The resulting confusion amplified existing stress responses and accelerated the breakdown of military coordination. The Vexar mindset of inherent superiority made them particularly vulnerable to psychological manipulation. Their warriors had been conditioned to expect either surrender or direct combat from inferior species. The concept of an enemy that would study them for centuries and then use their own psychology against them was beyond their strategic planning. This gap in their understanding prevented effective countermeasures against human tactics. Human strategists had spent 3 centuries analyzing predator species behavior patterns. They understood that conqueror civilizations develop specific blind spots regarding their own vulnerabilities. The Vexar's century of unchallenged expansion had reinforced their belief in inevitable victory through technological superiority. This overconfidence prevented them from recognizing the strategic deception being executed against them. The psychological impact extended beyond military operations to individual combat performance. Vexar warriors trained for offensive operations found themselves forced into defensive postures they had never practiced. Their conditioning emphasized aggression and domination rather than adaptation and survival. This training gap became apparent when they encountered opponents who refused to engage in conventional warfare. Human forces utilized urban environments as psychological weapons systems. They converted city layouts into complex traps that channeled Vexar troops into prepared engagement zones. Every building entrance and street corner served both tactical and psychological purposes. The constant uncertainty about enemy positions created sustained stress that degraded combat effectiveness over time. The galaxy now views humans with heightened caution because they demonstrated a unique combination of capabilities. Their ability to completely erase a civilization establishes their capacity for absolute response. Their subsequent offer of peaceful relations shows strategic restraint rather than expansionist ambition. This dual nature creates a stability based on demonstrated competence rather than threatened aggression. Other species recognize that humanity approaches threats with methodical precision rather than emotional reaction. Their 3-century preparation timeline indicates patience and long-term thinking, unmatched by other civilizations. The complete eradication of the Vexar demonstrates they will eliminate existential threats permanently rather than manage them periodically. The psychological warfare techniques humanity employed against the Vexar revealed a deep understanding of enemy mindset manipulation. Their ability to turn predator psychology against itself shows sophistication beyond conventional military thinking. This approach proves more devastating than technological superiority because it attacks the enemy's ability to function rather than just their physical assets. The galaxy fears humans because they redefined what constitutes real power in interstellar relations. Strength no longer means visible military deployments or territorial control. True power lies in preparation, patience, and psychological understanding. Humanity demonstrated that they can wait centuries for the perfect moment to strike, then eliminate threats completely without becoming conquerors themselves. Humanity faced the moral calculation with clinical detachment. The decision for complete eradication wasn't taken lightly, but emerged from 3 centuries of psychological and strategic analysis. Project Ghostwalker's operational parameters specified that only existential threats would trigger full activation. The Vexar met every criterion for classification as a Class 1 extinction risk based on their conquest patterns and psychological profile. Their declared intent to enslave or eliminate humanity removed any ambiguity about their objectives. The ethical burden was accepted as the necessary cost of species survival. Human strategists analyzed historical precedents of predator civilizations and found no successful examples of coexistence or containment. Mercy was considered but rejected after simulation models showed high probability of renewed aggression. The Vexar's evolutionary development as apex predators made them incapable of accepting subordinate status. Their psychological framework demanded dominance through constant expansion. Project Ghostwalker's fundamental purpose remained survival rather than conquest. The technology was designed for defensive application only, with activation requiring confirmed hostile intent. Human forces didn't claim Vexar territories or resources after the conflict. They eliminated the threat completely, then returned to previous borders. This distinction between eradication and expansion established important ethical boundaries for future engagements. The galaxy needed to understand human resolve completely to prevent future conflicts. The demonstration served as a deterrent that would save more lives than it cost. By showing absolute response capability coupled with strategic restraint, humanity established new parameters for interstellar relations. Other civilizations now understood that certain actions would trigger irreversible consequences while peaceful coexistence remained possible. This approach redefined galactic politics by introducing calculated deterrence through demonstrated capability. Power dynamics shifted from visible military displays to unseen preparedness. Civilizations now engaged in diplomatic relations with awareness that humanity could enforce agreements, but wouldn't initiate aggression. The balance created stability without requiring constant military confrontation. The ethical considerations were weighed against long-term galactic security. Allowing the Vexar to survive would have guaranteed continued conflict and potential catastrophe for other species. Their expansion pattern showed consistent escalation with each conquered civilization. Complete removal prevented future victims while establishing protective precedent for the entire galactic community. Humanity's acceptance of this moral responsibility reflected their understanding of interspecies dynamics. They recognized that some threats require permanent solutions rather than temporary management. The decision prioritized the survival of multiple civilizations over the continued existence of one aggressively expansionist empire. This calculation considered the greatest good across the broadest time frame. The choice of permanent solution over repeated conflicts demonstrated strategic wisdom. Historical analysis showed that predator civilizations consistently rebuilt and resumed aggression after temporary defeats. Containment efforts required constant military expenditure and vigilance. Complete eradication, while morally weighty, provided lasting security without perpetual conflict. This approach to threat management established new ethical frameworks for galactic relations. Civilizations now understood that declarations of extermination or enslavement would be taken literally and answered absolutely. The policy created clear boundaries for acceptable behavior, while allowing peaceful development within those parameters. Deterrence through demonstrated capability proved more effective than negotiated limitations. Humanity's subsequent diplomatic engagements emphasized cooperation and mutual development. They offered technology sharing and economic partnerships without demanding submission or tribute. This combination of overwhelming capability and peaceful intention created a stable foundation for interstellar relations. The galaxy learned that humanity would defend itself absolutely, but wouldn't seek domination. The ethical burden of absolute erasure was accepted as the price of preventing greater future suffering. Human strategists calculated that one decisive action would prevent centuries of conflict and countless casualties. This long-term perspective guided their moral reasoning and strategic decisions. The result was a galactic order where peace was maintained through preparedness rather than through constant warfare. Project Ghostwalker remained active but completely hidden after the Vexar conflict concluded. The system continued monitoring galactic threats through stealth observation posts and passive sensor networks. Its operational status shifted from active engagement to silent vigilance, maintaining readiness without revealing presence. The project represented humanity's long-term commitment to species survival, above all other considerations. Future generations would inherit the capability and responsibility without necessarily understanding the full scope. This ensured continuity of protection across centuries without requiring constant awareness of the threat environment. The technology was preserved at current capability levels but not expanded for conquest or aggression. Research continued at a measured pace focused on defensive applications rather than offensive enhancements. The balance between capability and restraint became a core principle of human strategic doctrine. This approach demonstrated that power could exist without requiring constant demonstration. The project's mere presence in the background served as sufficient deterrent against potential aggressors. Other civilizations understood that challenging humanity would trigger consequences beyond conventional warfare. Humanity secured its galactic position through preparation rather than expansion. They didn't claim conquered territories or demand tribute from defeated enemies. This distinction established a new model of power, based on security rather than domination. The galaxy learned that human capability focused on defense and deterrence rather than conquest and control. This approach created stability through demonstrated competence instead of threatened aggression. Civilizations could engage in relations knowing humanity would enforce agreements but wouldn't initiate conflict. The Ghostwalker legacy revealed that strategic patience outperforms brute force in long-term survival. The 3-century preparation timeline provided advantages that rapid expansion couldn't match. While the Vexar focused on visible conquest, humanity developed capabilities that operated outside conventional military paradigms. This difference in approach proved decisive when confrontation finally occurred. The victory demonstrated that understanding psychology and technology matters more than deploying superior force. Humanity's approach showed that true power lies in preparation timing rather than immediate display. The Vexar measured strength through fleet sizes and territorial control. Humanity measured it through strategic advantage and psychological understanding. This fundamental difference in perspective determined the conflict's outcome before the first shot was fired. The galaxy now understands that human power remains mostly invisible until required, creating stability without constant intimidation. The project's continued existence ensures that humanity will never face existential threats without response capability. The technology is maintained but not proliferated, preserving the balance between security and stability. Future generations will inherit both the capability and the ethical framework governing its use. This combination ensures that power will be applied with restraint and precision, rather than indiscriminate force. The legacy establishes that survival requires both capability and wisdom in equal measure. Humanity's victory demonstrated that strategic planning outweighs immediate military advantage. The Vexar possessed superior visible force but lacked understanding of their opponent's capabilities. Humanity accepted temporary vulnerability to achieve permanent security. This trade-off required discipline that expansion-driven civilizations couldn't comprehend. The result proved that patience and preparation create more lasting security than aggression and domination. The Galactic Order now operates under new principles established through human example. Power is measured in preparedness rather than deployment, in capability rather than demonstration. Civilizations understand that certain actions will trigger absolute response, creating clear boundaries for acceptable behavior. This framework allows peaceful development while maintaining security through deterrence. The balance provides stability without requiring constant military confrontation. Project Ghostwalker's ultimate lesson is that survival depends on understanding enemies better than they understand themselves. The 3-century preparation focused on psychological profiles and strategic patterns rather than just technological development. This comprehensive approach created advantages that conventional military expansion couldn't match. The victory proved that the most dangerous predators aren't those who display power constantly, but those who develop it silently and deploy it precisely. Humanity's victory demonstrated that true power resides not in visible strength, but in disciplined preparation and profound patience. The galaxy now comprehends that when humans identify an existential threat, they respond with methodical precision, not emotional reaction. Their approach prioritizes absolute resolution over mere victory, ensuring threats are eliminated permanently. The Vexar's downfall serves as a permanent lesson. The most formidable adversaries are not those who announce their dominance, but those who observe, prepare, and act only when the moment for absolute decisive action has arrived.